Welcome back to the Spiritual Teachers Podcast. With me today is my dear friend and brother here in Las Vegas. He goes by Jesse Wright. Jesse is an Army veteran, a primitive skills enthusiast, and a servant of love. It's such an honor to have you on today, brother. Thanks for coming on.
Yeah, happy to be here.
Yeah, it's gonna be awesome. We got some really amazing topics to cover today. We're going to talk about Jesse's awakening journey. We're going to talk about staying heart open and keeping a high vibration while maintaining presence. We're going to talk about the importance of discipline. We're going to talk about plant medicines and primitive skills. So we may not get to all these topics today, but we're going to try, and we have that intention. So I'd love to introduce you, Jesse, to share how your awakening journey started for you.
Yeah, my awakening was in 2019, so it's been about 5 years now, and
almost
6.
Yeah,
coming up 6. But prior to that, I was active duty Army. Went in when I was 20 and spent the whole first half of my year, fighting in the industrial military complex, doing that stuff. And
you were in for 8 years?
I was 14 and a half.
Whoa.
Yeah.
And you went in at 18?
I went in at 20.
Okay. Wow.
Yeah, 3 deployments, 1 full tour to Iraq and Afghanistan, and then a smaller tour to Afghanistan.
Wow.
Yeah. So
very different world now.
yeah. I was very identified with being the soldier. That was the identity, and the ton of events. I ended up getting stationed in Hawaii, in Schofield Barracks. I went there in 2011, and that kind of ended my tours overseas because we had to maintain a presence in the Pacific for other reasons. So we weren't on the tour schedule going to the Middle East. And, so I was able to get more family time, more grounding, and just kind of really fell in love with the island, right? Like it kind of, the fishing, the spearfishing, the way of life, and the beautiful temperatures, beach life, it was great.
And you were on Oahu, right?
It's on Oahu. And I just loved it so much, and I stayed. I re-enlisted to stay another tour in Hawaii, and then
not a bad place to be.
Not at all. So they were 8 years at this point, and I'm really into the fishing and the fishing community, and it's huge. And through the fishing, I started to meet a lot more the elders and the local elders on the island, and they started to. We'd spend a lot of hours out on the boat on the ocean, just me and the uncles. We call them uncles and the elders in Hawaii. And I started to see more through their lens, and understand more of that way of life,
like that deep connection to the earth,
deep connection to the
ocean.
earth and to the spiritual aspects of things. And I started practicing it too. When I'd take the kayak out, we would go, and I wouldn't take my kayak out unless I had a tea leaf to tie to the kayak, because we'd take the tea leaf for safe passage on the ocean. And then it was a whole ceremony at the end of coming in. You take the leaf off the kayak and you go down and you say a prayer of gratitude to the ocean for the blessings that were provided and for the safety of being out there. And then you give the leaf to the ocean.
I love that.
It's a ceremony that, I got to the point where if I didn't have a tea leaf, I would not fish. I would go get one before I would go on the ocean, because it just...
Do you know why it was tea leaves in particular?
I'm not completely sure. I know the tea leaf, it's not like a tea leaf like that you stoop and make a tea from. It's a big leaf.
Okay.
And it's spelled a little different.
Okay.
And it is used for cooking. I know sometimes they'll wrap meat in it and fish in it and use it for steaming. But it's one of the voyaging plants. It's one of the plants that the Polynesians brought with them when they traveled across the Pacific. So it's not native to Hawaii, but it's native to Hawaii as much as the Hawaiians are native to Hawaii, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Yeah. So So yeah, I started getting into the culture, and it started shifting my worldview a little bit. It started shifting my perspective from being this southern white boy, that was, grew up. I mean, and I had an interesting childhood. It definitely wasn't like normal, but it started shifting that.
You spent a lot of time in nature as a kid?
Yeah. I didn't want to get off topic too much, but yeah, I think that's relevant. I was the kid that was always in the woods,
Right.
and even if we grew up in the inner city of Charlotte in North Carolina, and I would, every chance I got, I'm going to the woods, and in the woods, it's just like a little wooded lot between people's backyards, because, but it's as much woods as I can get. So I'm like always in it, and yeah, loving that. And then my dad had me in martial arts from a young age. So there was a lot of meditation and a lot of conscious breathing, understanding how to belly breathe and stuff from a young age, and the discipline that comes through martial arts and stuff. So good foundation in that sense.
Yeah, for sure. And so how many years have you been out of the Army now?
7, maybe 8.
Okay.
My last year was 2018.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Beautiful. So you were still in the military as you were going out with these uncles?
Yeah. Oh yeah. Yeah. And getting to know. And then my last year, I started a business in Hawaii, while I was still in the military, and I was making custom fishing equipment.
Cool.
Mainly for the kayak guys, but then I shifted into making a lot of stuff for the boat guys too. So I got to know a lot more of the community through that.
Yeah.
And it got really popular. I got well known pretty quickly, and yeah.
Yeah, it just helped you move. So I saw all that gear in your garage, which is pretty cool.
Yeah, there's a lot of stuff left over from that.
That's awesome. So where did it go from there?
Yeah, man. So I'm still kind of, my perception's kind of locked in this, this narrow field for a while. And then guess in the year that I got out, 2018, I got prescribed medical marijuana in Hawaii for my PTSD and anxiety and all this stuff that I was going through from being, in combat so much. And
because you saw some crazy stuff out there.
I mean, I did. Yeah. I mean, there's definitely guys that saw crazier stuff than I saw, but I saw enough to be affected.
Yeah. You've shared some stories with me that are pretty intense.
Oh yeah. So the Army had me on all these prescription pills, right? I was 35 years old, and I was taking a handful of pills. And when I got out, I got prescribed the medical marijuana, and I started using that, and I started getting off all the pills.
That's
And
awesome.
I started this guy. I mean, there was a list of stuff: antidepressants, anti-anxiety, ADHD stuff. It was all of it, and I was just getting off of it. And I was smoking a lot of weed though. I was smoking a lot of weed. And for a whole year, yeah, I got out in 2018. I started using cannabis, started getting off all the meds, and the cannabis kind of opened up a different culture to me, a different lens, to see through. Very in contrast to that military, strict regiment lens.
I've had some really spiritual experiences on marijuana when I smoked it in college. Did it ever take you into deeper awareness?
It definitely was a teacher plant to me. It definitely had me thinking and seeing my life and my choices and the person that I was becoming, who I wanted to be. It was deeper perspective of this human, self perception. And yeah, so I was using cannabis for about a year, and then so the big awakening was very abrupt. It was not expected, it was not looked for, it just happened. And
you weren't really involved with anything in the spiritual community or anything?
Nothing. Yeah. No clue. And that's one of the reasons it was so challenging for me, is that the only concept of spirituality that I had was growing up Southern Baptist, and that was very loose. I mean, I don't even think we had a Bible in the house. And mom and dad took me to church maybe a dozen times my whole childhood.
Okay.
So it was like we were Southern Baptist, but we were like, were we really? You
Right.
know? Enough for the fear of all that to be programmed into me as a kid.
Right.
But that's about it.
That's the sinner.
Yeah,
all
you
that
know,
stuff.
Like I better believe so I don't go to hell.
Right. Right.
You know. So all that was there, and I guess it's relevant to say, you know, about, you know, around the time I was getting out of the army, I started questioning a lot of that. Like I was really questioning like religion, and I wasn't atheist to say. I kind of felt like there was still maybe something, but I wasn't sure. Like I was borderline atheist. I was like almost like, no man, this is it. I'm gonna die. It's lights out, and that's it. You know, and nothing. That's it, you know, and this is all just some spontaneous, freaking crazy, random thing, life, and it's just like we live, and we die, and we're gone, and that's it. You know, and that's kind of what I was thinking, but then I was kind of maybe there might be something else.
You had a little seed inside.
Something
Somewhere.
something small.
Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, it all kind of came to a head. I guess February of 2019. And I had this experience where my whole space got filled with spirit. You know, I swelled up and felt this love that at that point in my life I had never experienced before. It was.
So are you using any psychedelics at this time at all?
Just cannabis.
Okay.
Yeah, and I might have had like a small, less than 5 milligram little edible the morning before. So it had been like probably 10 hours since I had anything. So I'm relatively sober when this experience happened. And it's just my whole space like swelled up, and I looked around and I became like aware of like, I mean, how blessed I was. You know, I'm like living in Hawaii, had my family, and I'm like, you know, a roof over my head and food in the fridge, clean water to drink, you know, all these people that I call friends, you know, and it's a beautiful life. And I saw it kind of from a higher perspective. I got filled with so much gratitude.
Yeah.
And it's like a gratitude that I don't think I've ever experienced before. And it was overwhelming. I went out in my backyard, and I started saying thank you. And I just started saying thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you. And I said it like 1,000 times, and I fell to my knees and I started to sob and thank you. And the more intense I got with it, the bigger my chest space was swelling up, and I was like, it was almost hard to breathe because I was so full of spirit. And then the thought came, because in this whole process, it was like the only thought I had was gratitude. Thank you. Thought came, who are you saying thank you to?
Right.
when I had that thought, that warmth and that love that I was wrapped in started to dissipate.
Right.
And I stood up. And in that very moment that I stood up, a meteorite shot across the sky, a shooting star.
So it was nighttime?
It was nighttime, and it lit it up. And there was a moon that night, so this was like a big meteor, and it just like flew across.
Wow.
And I just knew, that was like, Spirit was getting my attention. He was like, the Spirit was like, God was like, wait a minute, hang on, you're onto something. Don't stop yet.
Right.
And it kind of took my breath away. And I paced around for a minute, and my kid's trampoline was in the backyard, and I climbed up on the trampoline and I laid on my back, and I started to pray. And at the end of my prayer, I opened my eyes, and in that very instant, another shooting star came in and broke in 2 pieces right above me.
Whoa.
Took my breath away completely. I just started to cry. I was like, oh my God, this is like so real. This is happening. And
The odds of that are like minuscule.
It's completely lined up with everything. And then I went inside and finished my night. You know, I ended up going to sleep that night, and I woke up the next day a completely different human being, completely transformed. The PTSD wasn't bothering me anymore. My back pain was gone. Vision was better and improved. And more than that, like the anger that I used to have. I used to be such an angry person, and the anger was completely gone.
So, did you have any like energy shooting up your spine, or
Not
like you didn't feel anything happening with the chakra system or the Kundalini rising?
Now that I can remember, but then at the time I had no idea what any of that stuff was.
Mm-hmm.
So the biggest thing that I can remember, like the most profound, was kind of just being washed clean
Mm-hmm.
of everything, of all elements, physical and emotional and mental.
Mm-hmm.
I couldn't drive to the grocery store without having road rage issue prior to the awakening.
Mm-hmm.
After the awakening, I haven't had one since. And it's been 6-7 years,
Mm-hmm.
and I won't have one.
Right.
Yeah. But
you know how to, ease that
yeah,
and use your breath and things like that now.
right. And, any lust that I was dealing with, I was 35-year-old male, and
Mm-hmm.
that was a thing. And that was washed away clean. I couldn't see a woman other than somebody's, daughter, wife, sister, there was nothing, anything else.
Mm-hmm. All my relatives.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. And then I dealt with crazy insomnia. And like after that, like going to sleep at night, my head would hit the pillow and I was out instantly, just instantly asleep. And one of the bigger profound things that I noticed was where my awareness was. It dropped out of my head and into my heart space.
Mm-hmm.
And I felt like I was living from here,
Mm-hmm.
feeling a lot more and just being connected a lot more and thinking a lot less.
Mm-hmm.
Definitely not in the head, in the heart. So this was very challenging for me too, because I had no foundation of spirituality. I knew nothing. And I'm like desperately trying to like come up with like answers and figure out like, what the heck is this? What's happened to me? Why am I like, what is this?
Right.
And I was struggling to maintain sanity for a few weeks, probably a couple months even. And I was desperately looking for answers and trying to figure this out. Oh, drop the headset.
That's all right.
Am I back?
You're back.
All right. So I remember talking to a buddy of mine, and I was explaining to him like what I had gone through, what had happened, and he goes, "Man, that kind of sounds like a DMT trip." And I said, "What's that?" You know? And he described it to me, and I'm like, "Man, if it's anything like what I've experienced, I need to like dive into this shit so I can figure out what's going on."
Yeah.
And come to find out, in Hawaii, the acacia tree, which is one of the trees that you can derive the DMT from, grows all over the island of Hawaii. It's
One of the few places
one of the,
in America.
Yeah, in America, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And I knew the tree. The tree is a tree that I had already become accustomed with. I knew it. And so as soon as I did my research on it, I went right into the jungle and found a tree and dug up a root, asked permission, gave some gratitude and took some bark and went home and started trying to figure out how to extract that stuff and make that stuff.
Mm-hmm. Because you didn't know anybody that had any.
Mm-mm.
Right.
Right. So I started, and I'm the kind of guy that I like to do everything myself,
You are that kind of guy.
So I ended up making DMT in my garage in Hawaii, and then I had no idea how to smoke it, of course, because it's not something that you can. It's not like smoking weed. It's quite different.
Mm-hmm.
And it took several tries. I mean, I could tell there was something there, but it took. And I'm watching all the videos and stuff.
Right.
3 hits. You got to get 3 hits, bro. 3 big hits. That's what they all say.
And there's like a specific way you breathe, right? Like you got to really like take it into your lungs.
Yeah.
And hold
and you have
it.
90 seconds, roughly.
Okay.
With smoked DMT, you have 90 seconds. And then you build a tolerance.
Mm-hmm.
And then you could smoke a pound of it, and it's not going to affect you.
Yeah.
I don't know. Potentially. Don't take that.
Right.
It's science, I don't know if that's real or not, but I know that you got like about 90 seconds and then it's not, you don't get the effect. You got to wait an hour to try again.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
Yeah.
I didn't know that.
Yeah. So you kind of got one go at it
Yeah.
at a time. So I figured it out, man. And I figured out a method to smoke it. And I finally got 3 big hits in. I had a crazy experience.
Yeah. Tell me about it.
So the first time that I did that, I was sitting in my shop in Hawaii, and a shop is kind of like a garage. It just wasn't anything fancy.
Mm-hmm.
But I remember getting the first hit and then blowing this fat cloud of white smoke, and I'm like, oh man, I did it. You know, it's like, do it again. And I got another one, blew a fat cloud. I was like, oh, it's happening. I'm going to go this time, you know, and I'm getting excited. And then I was like, all right, go for broke. Last hit. And I was like, and then I blew it out, and then every flat surface in my shop had these ancient ruined hieroglyphics appear on the surfaces.
Wow.
It was almost like a mix between Egyptian and Aztec, Mayan kind of a thing. And they all started like flowing down the walls and across the floor, like almost like it was like liquid, and they were flowing. And I just remember like looking and being like, that's interesting.
Yeah.
You know, like, okay. And it was almost like alien, like in like the symbols, you know. It was nothing. They were definitely hieroglyphics of some type.
Right.
And then all of a sudden this vibration came on, this, and then the reality just fell away.
Whoa.
Like the hieroglyphics gone, the shop gone, everything gone, and I'm in this like infinite black void, and you could tell there was space, but there was nothing in it. It was just, there was no stars, there was no light, there was no nothing. It was just this massive expanse of emptiness.
Mm-hmm. No. Okay. Yeah. So just total darkness.
Total darkness. And I'm like, I don't think that I felt like I was still my body, but I didn't see it.
Mm-hmm.
And kind of looking around, and then I noticed this way in the distance, the faintest little light. And it was like a bluish, purplish, violet light. And as soon as I noticed this light, it came to me. I went to it. Maybe we went to each other, but it was like we came together. Instantly, like through like 1,000 miles, you know, just together. And it was this cube. It was like a higher dimensional cube.
Mm-hmm.
And it was morphing in and out of itself. And it was emitting a frequency. It was
kind of like a toroidal field, or
it's really hard to explain, bro.
Okay.
Yeah, it was definitely morphing in and out of it. It maintained the shape of a cube, but it was morphing in and out of itself.
Mm-hmm.
And it was emitting a frequency. It was wah, 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 wah. You know, there's like this frequency.
Similar to what you heard when you first shot up?
No, a little different.
Okay.
Yeah, definitely a little different. And then, but I felt like paralyzed by love.
Uh-huh.
Like a spear of love had been shoved up through me and out the top of my head. And I was just like, oh. And I'm floating around this cube, and it's talking to me in a sense, and it was telling me stuff. And I can't really, it's been a long time since that experience. I can't really recall everything it said to me.
Mm-hmm.
But at some point it was like, all right, it's time for you to go back.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm like, no, I don't want to go back. I mean, I do, but not yet.
Yeah.
And it's like, that's all right. We'll get to hang out again sometime.
Uh-huh.
And I opened my eyes, and I'm back in my shop, sitting there like nothing had happened.
Uh-huh.
Like, wow. That's wild.
Yeah. Did you ever take any notes down of what
I should
it said
have.
to you? Oh, okay.
I should have in hindsight, but I didn't.
Okay.
But that kind of cracked me open to the fact that, like, you know, other than the awakening itself, is like there's a lot more to this reality than what we experience on the daily basis of just, you know, going through this human experience. Like there's levels to this, there's layers to this.
Mm-hmm.
And I continued to experiment with the DMT for a few months, and eventually put it down for a while. And
because I think you shared with me that you had a lot of questions, right?
I had a lot of questions, but the DMT was like giving me more questions than answers in a sense, because there's some questions were being answered, and I was realizing some things, it was so much, and it was so fast, and it was so complex. It was more questions than answers. So, and then I'm going through it with my ex-wife at the time, and she thinks I've lost my freaking mind, and I'm nuts. And I
Right.
had, and essentially a little bit.
Yeah.
I'm just this guy that's trying to figure this crazy awakening out, like what's going on.
Mm-hmm.
And then I ended up leaving Hawaii. My ex-wife, she moved away, and then I needed, it took us both income to live in Hawaii. It was expensive, right? So I ended up moving back to Tennessee. I had a house there.
Mm-hmm.
And she moved to California with the kids. So then when I got back to Tennessee, I had gone from this highest high to this lowest low, especially when the boxes came in, like that's the past life. And like I started, like it was difficult. And, it was very challenging, but I had tasted it, like Spirit had given me a taste of this higher state of consciousness, this higher perspective of this higher way of living. And
By that point, you're out of the military.
I'm out of the military, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. And so I get back, and I'm in Tennessee, and I'm putting pieces together, and I'm figuring it out. And at this point, I'm diving into more Eastern teachings, into deeper into yoga and Buddhism,
Mm-hmm.
and trying to expand my spiritual perspective.
Mm-hmm.
And once I started getting into Eastern teachings, it started making a lot more sense of like what I was experiencing and what I had gone through
Yeah.
a little bit. And then obviously it's 20th century. I'm watching some podcasts and listening to all the spiritual stuff I can, like I guess listening to this,
Right.
it's like, what can I find out? Let me figure this out. So, and I am, I'm realizing like, I'm not the only one that's experienced this,
Mm-hmm.
I'm not, not necessarily special, because the ego at some point comes in and it's like, tries to claim it and be like, oh man, you must be something to have had this experience.
Right. Right.
So then you realize, it's like, this is happening to millions of people right now.
Mm-hmm.
And they call it the Great Awakening, and I definitely believe we're in it.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, man, I started getting it together. And then I remember I watched this podcast, and I saw there was this guy in Colombia that was taking people into the jungles to drink ayahuasca.
Mm.
And I think he was on an Aubrey Marcus podcast.
Okay.
Yeah. I used to watch Aubrey back in the day,
Mm-hmm.
not so much anymore, but back in the day, definitely.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And then I contacted this guy down in Colombia, and he messaged me back immediately, and he's like, and we did an interview, and he's like, and 2 weeks later, I'm into the jungle in Colombia, like there. It's like quick.
Mm. That's awesome.
Yeah. So when I went into the jungle and to drink the ayahuasca,
Mm-hmm.
that one really helped way more than like the DMT, because the ayahuasca is slow, and you can have time to process and unpack and kind of be in that space. And
Usually like 8 to 10 hours, right?
depending on how much you drink.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it really helped me to kind of start really putting pieces of the puzzle together.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas when the smoke DMT, it's like 5-10 minutes, and it's just chaos, and it's so much, and it's like, yeah, I put a couple puzzle pieces together, but I got 15 new ones.
Right. Right.
Whereas this down there in the drink, and Spirit told me that too. It's like, you need to quit smoking this stuff. If you want to come back into this space, drink it.
Mm-hmm.
Which was talking about ayahuasca.
Mm-hmm.
Or soma.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Soma's another type of.
Soma is the one in the Vedas. In India, they talk about the drink of the rishis.
Okay.
Yeah, and there's actually a plant that grows in Asia that has the DMT and the 5-MeO inhibitor in the same plant.
Oh, wow.
And it grows there, and you can just pick it and make a tea from it, and it's ready to go.
Whoa.
Yeah.
I don't think I've ever heard of Soma.
Yeah, Soma. That's the old one, man. Soma from the. I'm not a scholar in this by any means, but I believe 5,000-6,000 years old. It's talked
At
about
least.
at least being used because it's like in the original Vedas used by the rishis. It's the drink of the enlightened ones.
That's really interesting.
Yeah.
If anybody knows somebody that's had that experience, tell them to email the podcast.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's really interesting.
Yeah. But in a sense, like, all these other plant medicines, they're very similar to Soma. I believe ayahuasca and Soma, they're different, but they're similar enough to, I think they put you into the same space.
Well, I've had the experience that different entheogens kind of unlock a different aspect of self in me. So, like, for example, sassafras gave me an experience of being above and seeing all the programs from a higher perspective. I believe each one of them has some sort of piece that it unlocks. So I'm really curious if somebody has sat with both Soma and ayahuasca, what the difference would be.
So the thing is, Soma now, we don't know what Soma is. As far as
we don't.
goes, we don't know. Yeah, it's something that's in the Vedas and it's recorded. It's being used, but it was lost in time.
Okay.
So there's speculation that it could be this plant that's in Asia. I don't remember the name of the plant, but there's speculation that that's it.
Okay.
But it could be because so many plants have DMT in them. There could be, and then there could be a plant with MOAI inhibitor in India somewhere that they were mixing together like ayahuasca.
Right.
We don't know because of this.
Like the chacruna mixed with the ayahuasca
with the caffeine,
to cause the.
But there could be a very similar blend over there in India and the Himalayas or something that they were using, and they were calling it Soma, but it's the technology's lost the time. We don't know exactly what. We just know the name, and we know it was a psychedelic drink that they were drinking.
Okay, cool. So you go down to Colombia and you sit with this maestro, right?
Maestra.
Oh, okay.
Maestra. Yeah, we went. So I went in, and we took a canoe. Or we drove out into the middle of Putumayo, Colombia, and then we drove out into like Puerto Asis, and then from Puerto Asis we went like way into the jungle and then down this gravel road for miles to this boat ramp, essentially. And there was like canoes and stuff, and we get on this canoe and we just go deeper into the jungle for another several, miles. I don't know how far exactly, probably 5, 6, 7, 8 miles into the jungle, a couple different little cutoffs of a river, and then we pull up to this village, and it's semi-modern. Like they have wooden plank. They had been milling some wood with chainsaws, it looks like, and they were making some crude like wooden structures. So
they had electricity?
No.
Oh, okay.
No, there was no electricity, but you could tell technology had touched.
Okay.
Yeah, for sure. It wasn't super primitive.
Right.
But I went over to the Maloka and then met Maima Sina. And then that night I had a full ceremony with Maima.
What was that like?
So for me, it was interesting. We drank about 10 p.m. and about 30, 45 minutes in, I could tell most of everyone, a lot of the tribe was in there drinking with us too. There was myself and 2 other guests that had come down from the States.
So it was a pretty small circle.
Very small circle. And then our guide, and then the tribe. So we all drank about 10 p.m. And Maima called everyone up one at a time, and we'd take the drink of ayahuasca. And I remember sitting in my hammock, and I could tell, like, one of the guests that came down with me within 15 minutes, he's in the jungle outside the Maloka project throwing up. And then I watched him walk back in. He could barely walk. He's like, I'm like, wow, he must be feeling it. And I'm then sitting there going, damn, I don't feel anything. And I'm like looking at my hands. I'm like, oh man. And it's 10. Another hour goes by, 11 something, and I'm like, I can tell like some people are starting to sing, and like there was some like more commotion. Like I can tell everyone's getting into the space. I'm not feeling anything, nothing. And then there's some crying going on. Like somebody was having some emotional something coming up, and they were crying. And then the guide comes over and he says, he goes, "Hey, how you doing?" I'm like, "Man, I am completely sober. I feel nothing." And it's been 2 hours already. So he goes and talks to my mom, and then I end up going back up, and she gives me a second cup, bigger cup, and I drink. And then he's like, "Why don't you play some flute for everyone?" Because I was playing flute then at the time. And he's like, "So some people are going through a hard time. Like maybe you can play some flute and kind of help with the atmosphere." And I was like, "Oh man, I've never played a flute in like this kind of setting before, you know?" It's kind of like on the spot, you know, like in this Maloka in front of a tribe. You want a ceremony, and I'm going to play my flute. Like, oh shit! So let me go over. I walked over to the river, which is not too far away, 50 yards away or something. And there's a bench, and I sat down and I started playing the flute over there. I wanted to get warmed up, and it started flowing really beautifully, real good. And I just got kind of loud with it, and I know everyone could hear. Because my look was close enough. Like, they could hear me playing. It was just, I'm a little removed. And then I was thinking, okay, I'll go play in the Maloka. I feel confident. But by the time I got back, I was like, not going to play the flute. The medicine's kicking in really strong. I put the flute away and I sat down in my hammock. And I crossed my legs and I kind of sat like in a meditative like position, you know.
Yeah.
But in the hammock, kind of facing long ways. And I started doing this breath work, like the pranayama. And there was this particular breath work that I had never done before. I didn't know anything about it. It just kind of came to me in the medicine space. And the next thing I remember is I'm looking down from above into the Maloka. And it's daylight outside. And everyone is like sitting around and playing music and singing. And I noticed myself down there too. And I'm sitting down there playing the flute. But everyone is like, everyone that was in ceremony, this is the next day. And I'm seeing it from above and from the sides and kind of from all around. And I'm witnessing it. And it's almost like I was like the maestro. Like I was like doing the thing with the sticks, you know, like, yeah, you do this and you do that, you know, like controlling like this thing, but I was like everything, you know, like, and there was just so much love and so much joy in the fact that this moment was being created. And it was very profound. And then the next thing you know, I just vanished into pure white, infinite light. And I was just completely absorbed and gone, and that like ceased to exist.
Wow.
Just completely gone. And it was beautiful though. There's nothing scary or fearful about it. It was the most beautiful experience.
So did you have your eyes closed when you were sitting on the hammock?
I mean, probably.
Yeah.
Yeah, potentially. I don't know. But the next thing I remember after dissipating into the infinite white light of everything is the thoughts came back on, you know, like there's a thought that I was something other than everything. Like I was like, wait a minute. And then I opened my eyes and I could barely make out the fact that there was something around me. And I was like, I reached my hand and I could feel the hammock in front of me and I'm touching it. I was like, oh yeah. You know, like it started slowly kind of coming back, and I took a foot out and I put it down and I touched the floor, and I was like, oh man, the ground, and I was like, oh, I gotta go touch it, you know. So and it's daylight now, and I had gone in at like 2, maybe 2:30, maybe no, not even that, probably like 1 or something, because it wasn't too long after I drank the second cup, and I just left. So I had been sitting in my hammock, not moving, for like 6 hours.
Wow.
Sitting there. And it was like 6:30 in the morning at this point. And I get up and I kind of like very like pushing the hammocks out of my way. And I'm like, get out to the door, and I like drop down and I stick my fingers into the earth, and I started like, oh yes, you know, like I'm back on the planet. You know? And the guy, he came and grabbed me. He goes, "You can't do that here," because he thought I'd drop down to vomit.
To purge, right.
But I was not. I was totally just digging my hands in the ground. And it was really interesting. He said, "Come over to the river, or come over by the river." So as I walked to him, I could see him, but then everything would, like 2 or 3 different times, everything phased out completely white. Like I went back into that white space and I had to stop. And and I'd come back in and I could see the jungle again and I could see him and take a few more steps and then everything would phase out again and I'd stop. And then I could see him and then I finally got to him and I gave him a hug and I'm like, "Am I back?" And he goes, "Yeah, you're back, brother." But I was not back. It took me about a good hour after that. The mama actually had to give me a cup of alcohol.
Whoa.
Yeah.
I didn't know they did that.
Yeah. So it was for about an hour after I even hugged. I'm struggling. I'm vibrating so high. I was struggling to come back into my body.
And they don't use Hape at this one?
They do.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So I was struggling to come back into my body. And I was really having a hard time, like coming back in. Mm-hmm. And Mima, it was a small little cup, and it was like, I think it was like some kind of Amazonian moonshine or something, like some sugar cane. Uh-huh. And I don't drink alcohol, like I'm totally against it.
Right.
But the guide and Mima, and they were all like, this is going to lower your vibration and help bring you back into the physical. Uh-huh. So in this sense, it's medicine. So I agreed to take it. And I took the shot, and within a minute, I was back.
Wow.
I was back down. I was grounded. I was coherent. Wasn't intoxicated at all.
Right.
I was still glowing from the medicine. I needed a little help kind of coming back down out of that higher plane and back into the physical. So in that sense, it definitely did the trick.
Wow.
And then it instantly, like they put a flute in my hand and they walked me up into the front of the Maloka and like had me play flute for everyone. It's like, and I'm shaking because I'm just like finishing this experience, like, and I'm trying to. It sounded horrible. I'm like, I can barely even like control my hands, and I don't know what I'm doing. And but I sought to play anyways. And by the time I finished, it was beautiful. I mean, it was flowing through, and it was the most beautiful music ever. But in the beginning, it was rough. It sounded like a 3-year-old with a recorder.
Well, that's probably maybe what they were intending, right? That while you're playing, you're kind of bringing your feelings back in, your fingers.
But it was wild, man. Yeah, I had to remember first that I was a human, and then I had to remember like I was a human with an identity. I had a name. I had kids. You know, I had life experiences. Yeah. Like it all had to come back in, like ground it all back into becoming this human, this character.
I can relate to that. When I sat with the ayahuasca, I totally lost my identity. My best friend, who was one of the guardians, he like pixelated and disappeared in front of my eyes. Like,
yeah. Well, that's what happened when I was walking towards the guide. When I would phase out white, he had later told me like every time I stopped that I would pixelate it and disappear.
So wild.
Yeah.
So interesting.
Yeah, it's crazy. Okay,
so that was your first experience, right? And then where did it take you from there?
So in that trip, we had a couple more ceremonies, but that was definitely the most profound for me. Mm-hmm. And then I went back to the States, and then I ended up going back to Colombia like 3 or 4 more times over the course of 2 years. Mm-hmm. And in Ecuador too.
You found a different.
Yeah, well, I traveled around, you know, because I had paid to go down to this first guide, and it was pretty expensive. Mm-hmm. And I'm living on, you know, a little bit of a pension from the army, so I'm like a fixed income. I don't have a tremendous amount, you know, of funds to spend to go travel down and to these retreat centers and stuff. So I decided I was just going to wing it, and I'm going to start traveling around and find some taitas. And I don't recommend that. Anyone listening to this, like, don't do that. Like, not everyone down there serving medicine has good intentions. You know, I definitely.
That's really important to emphasize.
It's so important. You know, the ayahuasca is a portal. It opens the door, and that door can go many different ways.
Yeah.
And you're so vulnerable in that space.
Yeah.
And I, both fortunately and unfortunately, ended up sitting with what we would call brujos.
Which translates to witch,
To
right?
witch, yeah. So basically, like a witch doctor, like somebody that's like, some of them are neutral, like they're not really of the light or of the dark, and some of them are like of the dark, and they got demons and shit, and those things are working through them, and they're like luring people in and fucking with them.
And you could see the demons when you were on the medicine around them?
No, I never saw, but you could tell.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So yeah, it's not to be messed around with, you know. But luckily, you know, I bounced around. I tried some different taitas, shamans, brujos, you know, and I finally found Taita Umberto. And
Where's he located?
he's in Putumayo,
Okay.
in Colombia.
Which is more central?
It's down the border of Ecuador.
Oh, okay.
It's kind of the wild west of Colombia. Like when you think of like the cartels and the FARC and where they're growing cocaine and like all the stuff that happens in Colombia, it's in Putumayo.
Well, I didn't know this, but it's legal to grow coca plants in Colombia because they grow naturally there too.
They grow naturally, and then they use it for the, you know, ancestral medicines.
Right. A lot of the Mamos and different tribes over there use it just the plants themselves, right? The coca plant to give themselves some grounding and some of those like uplifting.
Yeah. All
energy.
The way from the Sierra Nevadas, like all the way down into Ecuador, like the whole range of Colombia is grown. And you can buy it. Like you go to Bogota and you can just buy coca leaves if you want to. But, you know.
So he's down on the border of Ecuador, right? And he gave you a totally different type of experience, right? After these brujos.
Well, so there was a couple different, you know, encounters with brujos, you know, and so yeah, Taita Umberto was like legit, and he was all light and like anchored in like this beautiful, loving energy, and every ceremony I had with him was very, very good, very clean. I left the ceremony feeling energized, feeling uplifted, feeling in a high vibration.
Not like your energy was being siphoned.
Right. And that's the big thing that you can tell. Like if you've sat with medicine and it's not been in a good container, is you're going to come out of that feeling very drained, very, very fatigued and weak. But if you've sat with medicine in a good, positive container, you should come out feeling like energized and charged, even without sleeping all night. Even like with fasting and purging and not sleeping, you should still come out charged, energized.
Right.
Yeah. So that's how you can. That's a good indicator and tell. But you know, sitting with the brujos was a powerful experience for me too. Even though I got attacked and I feel like they cast spells of fear on me and get anxiety and stuff. And it caused me to have to really dig deep and to do all the things to raise my vibration so that couldn't mess with me anymore.
Right.
So it definitely, in the long run, as hard and difficult as it was, it's made me a stronger, more grounded, more solid individual today because I went through that.
Yeah. And now there's probably a piece where it also refined your intuition to tell when it's not a good fit, right?
Oh yeah, and definitely like, you know, washed away a lot of that naiveness of thinking that it's all rainbows and butterflies down there.
Right. Well, when I went on my journey, when I reached a certain level of love and gratitude, none of those beings existed because I was seeing them around certain people, but then when I reached this level of love and just pure bliss, there was all the Shipibo patterns, which is a tribe in Peru that also sits with ayahuasca, and they make these amazing fabrics and cloths and so that they have a very distinct pattern. And so I was seeing that everywhere around this garage that I was in, right? And in that space there was there didn't exist any of those lower density beings, you know? And were you able to reach something similar where on the medicine you were able to reach that frequency?
Oh, totally. Totally. But it's the real work is off the medicine.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, definitely on the medicine, get there. But yeah, the real work is off the medicine. Yeah. Because it was what I had gone through with this attack, I guess they were like a psychic attack, was affecting me more like in the daily life than it was definitely on the medicine. Yeah. And I guess that can bring us into the discipline piece, like.
Yeah, let's talk about that.
Where I really figured out the discipline to do checking all the hard boxes every day,
Yeah. So what does discipline look like to you? Because it looks different for different people.
Discipline to me is having the determination and the will to follow through with commitment to better yourself on a daily basis.
With self.
Yeah, because we can only control our vessel, and everything else is outside of the control. But what we can control is us. So we can choose to eat healthy, and first we have to educate ourselves on what that looks like, and then we can choose to make sure that we guard the content that comes into our psyche through our eyes and our ears.
It's kind of hard sometimes now with Instagram, because when you're scrolling, it could be anything.
It could, but having the mindfulness and the awareness to not pause on these things, because then you can tweak the algorithm to where it's feeding you good stuff.
Right.
Yeah. So it's being present and mindful enough with it, even though you're scrolling an Instagram, you're still mindful scrolling.
Right.
I'm not going to look at that. I'm like, there's Muji. Okay. There's some Alan Watts. All right.
I'm interested in that. Yeah.
So let me like this and play this out. So the algorithm feeds me more of this good stuff, this positive stuff. So yeah, it's being really mindful of what we're bringing into our psyche. But not only that, it's like protecting, paying attention to the music we're listening to, and what kind of vibration does it hold? What kind of frequency is it? What are they singing about? What's the message? And it's all because we're programs, and everything programs us. And so yeah, it's paying attention to that. It's choosing to seek out positive knowledge and positive media that's gonna nourish the soul, gonna nourish the brain in a good way. So basically, it's taking care of the mind, the body, and the spirit. It's equally got to take care of all three of those.
Yeah, and there's the energetic hygiene piece, right?
Totally.
Where some people don't think about that, and it's really important to maintain our energetic hygiene, because you could take a shower every morning, but if you're not dealing with the stuff in your mind and your right, like in your thoughts, then and in your energetic field and your aura and things like that, then that's gonna have an impact on the day and on your life, and kind of have pieces of the show running that may not be so clear as to where it's coming from,
Totally. And then that's what meditation comes in. And it's like everyone listening is like, oh God, here comes the meditation again. Meditation.
Right.
Everyone talks about meditation. We're like, yeah, I mean, it's like there's a reason, like all the sages and the gurus of the past were like, meditate more, because through meditation we learn to become the witness. And we witness the thoughts. And when we can witness the thoughts, then we can have control over the thoughts to an extent. We can choose which ones to hang on to and which ones to let go.
Yeah, there's an awareness that gets developed.
Yes.
And then when there's an awareness, then with the awareness, I believe that's like 90 to 95% of it, because then we can shift it. Once we have that awareness.
Exactly. Mindfulness.
Like catching it when it first starts, whatever that harmful thought or belief is, right?
Yeah. Well, it's like me recently, I've been practicing, being mindful of any kind of judgment that comes up, because I just moved across town and I'm in a different area, and I'm at the gym. It's a different crowd, and there's maybe a little ignorance around, and I would catch myself. I'm like in my head, kind of judging a little bit. And then but I catch myself, and very quickly I flip that judgment to compassion. and flipping judgment to compassion is a powerful practice.
Yeah. So when you're doing that, can you kind of take us through your steps in your mind? Like, what do you, when you say flipping it, can you explain that a little bit?
Say, I see someone and they're maybe kind of acting a certain way and kind of putting off a certain energy and instead of thinking, oh, they're full of ego and they're just showing out and they're being
Like the guys in the locker room flexing and stuff.
right, instead of like judging and oh, they're so trapped in their ego, it's this the good compassion. It's like, oh, this is where they're at, and reminding yourself that's God too,
Mm-hmm.
that's still spirit, experiencing creation through their perspective,
Yeah. If you looked at my phone in 2012, that there was a lot of photos of me.
flexing in the bathroom mirror.
Yeah. Just like trying to get fit and big,
Yeah. So,
I'm sure you have probably had some as well at some point, right?
I mean, yeah, at some point, yeah.
Yeah. For me, it was more like to see my progress, but at the same time, there was that egoic component for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. Like,
Well, one of the things I've come to realize on this journey is we spend the first part of our life building the ego.
Mm-hmm.
So the second part of our life, we can let it go. We can dissolve it and back into the emptiness, into nothingness.
Right. If there's that desire and if there's that
Right. Well,
awareness, right?
Some people, it gets really strong and it stays.
It gets
really,
a lot stronger for some people.
It stays strong, up until the last breath.
Yeah.
But I feel like, I think I was listening to Ram Dass one time, and he says, to become nobody, you must first become somebody.
Mm-hmm. I like that.
Yeah. So it's like the process of building that ego, and I feel like the teenagers is really start building this identity. We're grasping everything we can to build this persona of who am I? This is who I am, and I am this way because of that, and admiring everyone else that has already an ego established because it's look at this freaking guy and all the shit he's been through. I mean, he's, you admire that as a teen,
Mm-hmm.
And then you kind of embody that in your 20s and 30s, and then maybe you have a shift where you just start letting all of that go and letting it all fall away. I see it so strong with having been in the army. I'm still friends, through social media with so many of the brothers in arms that I served with.
Mm-hmm.
And it's weird because we're all retired now. Everyone's out.
Mm-hmm.
I think there might be one or two guys still in, where they're command sergeant majors or something, they're 20-something years in.
Mm-hmm.
But even everyone that's out, most of everyone still identifies with having been the soldier. It's it's a huge piece of their identity.
Yeah.
It's and
Well, it's such a, you're giving so much, right?
well, you give a huge portion of your life,
Right.
and it's also during those developmental years.
Right.
But I see it a lot with the guys that are suffering from PTSD and from different things. I feel like a lot of it is they don't want to let it go because it's who they are.
Mm-hmm.
Like you wear trauma badges on a uniform. Let me put PTSD up here. Let me put this rage up here on alcoholism and all this stuff. I'm gonna wear my trauma, like badges to identify who I am, and for them to let go of that trauma means let going of their identity in a sense, and it's challenging, but it's also very powerful too.
Yeah, it makes me think about when I was younger. I had a girlfriend, and she would say to me I'm just like this. This is just me. You either take it or leave it. And I thought that was such a interesting belief, right? That one wouldn't be willing to see that there's opportunities to be better, to shift, to align with love more, to be more embodied and more raising the frequency, basically, right? That that wasn't even a conversation back then. I was fully in the matrix, right? But like a part of me still knew and felt like if you really wanted to, it's an internal job, but if you really wanted to, anything's possible with shifting out of fear, anxiety, depression, all that, you know, the list goes on, right? But like all of that is able to be shifted inside an individual if they just choose it.
It comes down to direct experience, though.
Right.
It comes down to, has the individual had a direct experience to understand that that's a possibility?
Right.
For me, if you would have had this conversation with me 10 years ago, I would have just like looked at you like you had a phallus growing out of your forehead.
Right.
And I would have been like, what's this guy on?
Right. Well,
And I wouldn't have got it. You could have spoke blue in the face, and I wouldn't have got it because I
Right.
wasn't on that frequency then. I wasn't in that awareness, and I hadn't yet had that direct experience.
right.
And when I went through the awakening, I had the direct experience. I had no foundation, but I had the direct experience. So now I know like this is all possible, and now I know like it's, you know, it's ultimately all love.
Yeah.
It's all one. You know, that's what I got. The big thing I got through the plant medicine is it's all God. Everything's God. We exist in the dream of God.
Right.
And we're all manifestations of God. Even this desk and this microphone is all a manifestation of God in some way.
Yeah.
Some of us get to be aware manifestations in a sense. And yeah.
Like consciously help
Co-create.
co-create or kind of like at least guide the boat on the river. Because I believe that the river, there's like a blueprint that we're born with, and there's a river there, but we get to kind of, we can stop on this shore, we can
free
go
will
over here,
yeah,
right?
there's some free will in it.
But there's still a river, taking us
well, I mean, it's
somewhere.
like the old Masonic lullaby: row, row, row your boat gently down the stream.
Oh, I didn't know that was
Merrily,
Masonic.
merrily, merrily, life is but a dream.
I didn't know that was Masonic. Oh, that makes a lot of sense.
Because it's talking about the boat is your life. I mean, the boat is you, the stream is your life, and you're rowing gently because it's all a dream. It's God's dream, and we're just a manifestation in it.
Right.
And I think the most powerful and the biggest flex we can do as humans is getting small enough to get out of the way and allowing spirit to kind of like live through us less restricted.
Yeah.
So we have free will, but let's use that free will to get out of the way.
Right. And like getting out of the way to me means like removing internal blocks.
Yeah, and also overcoming desire. Because as humans, we have so much desire programmed into us. The desire to eat, the desire to procreate, the desire to experience pleasure, the desire to be comfortable, and the list goes on. You know,
Right.
And it's transcending desire into being, into just being, and being comfortable in whatever, in the environment, in whatever the situation, and then just allowing spirit to flow. And I think that's the huge piece too. If somebody is holding space in ceremony, and this is why you should always pay attention to like how in their ego are they? Because somebody who's going to be a really good space holder is going to be incredibly humble and meek, so that the spirit can flow through them in that sacred container, in that space.
Right.
Because somebody who's very in their ego, it's going to be more of a blocked channel, and they may have good intentions. But if they're like, I'm the shaman,
Right.
you know, it's like, it's not going to flow.
Right.
And the container is not going to be as soft and loving and beautiful as it could be if they will allow themselves to just get out of the way and just be.
Yeah. I mean, a big obstacle or challenge that I see a lot of people facing, even in the spiritual community, is like the ability to just sit and be with themselves.
Yeah.
Right. And there's certain practices to get you there. Like if you can't sit still and you got all these racing thoughts, there's ways of doing breath work or chanting a mantra or holding a mudra with your hands. Like all those things can get they're designed, a technology that's designed to help people get to just be.
And that's why we have our daily practices, right? Our saltness every day. I mean, nowadays, I don't do nearly as much plant medicine. I mean, maybe mushrooms once in a while, but I do a lot of yoga, and I'm diving deep into yoga. And
Yeah, you've been coming to our Kundalini yoga classes.
yeah,
Which is awesome.
A few times, yeah.
Yeah.
Yoga is like where it's at, you know. And it's it's our daily sadhana, you know. It's meditating. It's the right living. It's basically living the 7 limbs of yoga, and when we do that, it helps us find that stillness and that presence and that peace and that calm, I believe.
Yeah. Yeah, and there's so many ways now in society to distract and to numb, right?
We live in a time, I believe, where human beings have more distractions now than we've ever had in known history. As far as we know, recorded history, we live in a time now with more hindrances and more distractions. Especially
Atlantis might have been the closest. Yeah, who knows?
Who knows what technology they had? You know, did they even have social media? Did they have Instagram? Did they have Las Vegas? I mean, freaking bro, we live here in a city now. We were like Sin City. Like every freaking whim or desire anyone could ever possibly imagine is at, you know, a 10-minute drive away. You know.
Well, that's why we're here, to hold that light to balance it out.
To balance it out. I believe that.
Yeah, but. Yeah, and that's like a huge test, right? Because people come here from all over the world to go
to indulge.
To just like
to give in,
get the good food, get the alcohol, the clubs, the whatever pleasure. Yeah, it's really interesting. If you asked me even 3 years ago, would you ever live in Las Vegas? I would have just looked at you like
you're crazy.
You had 3 heads, but
same with me. You know, it's like I never thought I'd be here.
Yeah,
but here I am, and I believe we're on the front lines. You know, we're on the front lines. That's part of why we're here.
Yeah, man. So this experience, right, that you had, even in the original awakening, it started to help. You mentioned the swelling in the heart center and opening and just feeling that, right? So how have you integrated that into your life, like everyday life?
So that is my motivating drive in day-to-day life. I often am able to find myself back in that space. Not every day, and sometimes I can go a week without finding it. And sometimes I can be in it, you know, every day for weeks, and it fluctuates and it comes and goes. But when I'm checking all my boxes, when I'm doing my sadhana, when I'm taking care of my temple and my body, and I'm eating as clean and healthy as I can, and I'm being present and mindful, and I'm giving gratitude and thanks for everything that I consume, for all my relations, for every aspect of life. When I'm meditating and I'm finding that stillness and and resting in the space between thoughts for extended periods of time, I'm doing all these things, and the biggest one is when I'm being in service and I'm doing for other people, and I'm helping, you know, with the homeless community here in Vegas, or I'm, you know, volunteering to help to teach in some way, or to spread love in some way, or I meet somebody at the gym and we start having a spiritual conversation, and then spirit starts to flow through me and their eyes water up because I've touched their soul. That's when that whole space in me like cracks open and spirit flows out, and I just get so full and so filled with the essence of God and love. And that's the highest high that could possibly be. There is no higher high than God. And that is my motivator, and that is my driving force in daily life. And you know, I've fully surrendered to God on the side of love. And I say the side of love because I believe it's all God. The darkness and the light through which it shines, it's all God. But I also believe there's a little bit of polarity going on, and I definitely am in service.
A lot of bit of polarity, I'd say.
I definitely am in service on the positive side of love, to that aspect of God or divinity.
Yeah. And I think it's a refinement, right? Like for me at least, it's like I'm constantly getting a little bit, cracking my heart open a little bit more, just opening a little bit more, it's like, and it comes in waves, like you said, right?
Yeah.
Where like things will happen in life and, challenges and different gnarly experiences, but then just coming back to that space and that energy and that knowing, right? Of like,
Because you
what
felt
that
it,
felt like.
you've experienced it before. You mean you know it's there.
Yeah.
The other thing too that I've noticed too is it's this, you got to go through the process of not getting addicted to that state of being. You get addicted to living in bliss, and then when you're not in bliss, you're chasing it. And when you're chasing it, you're not going to find it.
Right.
At least I wasn't able to find it until I surrendered, and just allowed it to be, and then it came back. So. It's a process, and it's an evolution. And I believe it's different for all of us. We're all experienced a little different. We're all different in that sense.
Yeah, the surrender piece, I think what you mentioned is really important, because when there's too much ego, or when things are maybe feeling a little bit off, right? Like off center, that coming back to that, it's just that surrender. It's like, sometimes it's like the life experiences have taken me to my knees, right? And I'm just like, all right, like here I am, and just like full surrender. And it seems like there's different levels and layers to it, right? Like there's kind of like a superficial surrender where it's like, okay, I surrender, but then it's like a full blown, like just laying on the floor, like, all right, I'm here, creator. What's trying to be taught to me through this experience?
Exactly. And that's what it is. It's all a lesson. It's all learning. I think that's why we're here, here to experience and to provide creator, the God source, with the experience of being you.
Right.
Everyone, we're providing that experience to God.
Yeah.
And through those experiences, we learn and we gain the lessons, and we become wiser.
Yeah, absolutely. So you've told me a little bit about this, but I'm really fascinated with the primitive skills that you've developed.
Oh yeah.
So you started what, like around 16?
So yeah, I've always been that kid that would play in the woods. I was the kid that would be in the woods, like setting up booby traps for the other kids. There were never any serious injuries. It was never meant to be malicious. It was always meant to be like pranking,
like funny,
fun. Yeah. But there was definitely some.
What kind of booby traps were you setting?
Like I dug a pit and I put like little branches over it on the trail, hid in the bushes and waited, and like knew that they were coming and waited for them to fall in the pit, and we're like, I got you. It's only like 4 foot deep,
right.
And it's fine. It's like there's not spikes in it or anything, but just stuff like that.
I can see you as this little mischievous boy. That's hilarious.
Oh yeah. I like climbed up in the trees, and with a little wrist rocket and shooting berries at people, and then I'm all painted up and like covered in leaves. They can't, like a sniper in a tree with a slingshot shooting berries.
That's awesome.
Yeah, I was that kid.
I'm happy they weren't rocks, because that could have been bad.
No, they weren't rocks. Yeah, no, I was prankster, but not malicious.
Right.
I had some sense of.
Yeah. So how did you find
So when I was
that world?
Yeah, when I was 16, I was living in the inner city of Charlotte, and I was a rambunctious teenager. I was getting into all kinds of stuff, running with a little bit of the wrong crowd, and drinking too much. There was, some drugs involved, but nothing crazy. And, my parents realized, like, do we need to get Jesse out of here? Like, it's getting bad, The high-speed chase across Charlotte. Not from the cops, but from like these gangsters that are trying to shoot us up, and we're like running.
Whoa.
And then, it was That wasn't good. And so mom and dad ended up moving me out of the city to live with some friends of theirs that lived way out in the country.
Mm-hmm.
And old house. The house was built in 1801.
Whoa.
Yeah, it's called Holly Bend, and it was in between two massive wildlife refuges.
Whoa.
And it was in a bend of the river. The river came down and made this big bend. That's why they Holly Bend. And then the house is right in the middle. Two massive wildlife refuges with the river on three sides.
So no neighbors on it.
Well, there was one neighbor like a mile down the road.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. And the people that I moved in with was Ann and Hawkeye. And Hawkeye, Robert Likas was his name, but everyone called him Hawkeye. They were primitive skills enthusiasts. They taught primitive living skills on the property out there. People would come out and stay for a couple of days and learn all kinds of stuff.
Oh,
and
cool.
I'm living with them.
Right.
And I'm 16, 17.
Uh-huh.
And then they're like, oh, great, you're going to stay with us. You're going to be an assistant instructor. So we're going to have to teach you and train you up real quick.
Right, right.
Yeah, and I was all into it. I mean, I was loving it. I was like, oh, this stuff is great. You know? So the flint knapping, the hide tanning, the traps and snares, medicinal plants, all the different crafts, bulk craft and pottery, you know, like you name it. Like we did all of it.
Mm-hmm.
And I was getting one-on-ones with them in between groups coming out to take classes, but I was also like very involved in classes for like a 2-year period.
Oh,
like
wow.
Every month, you know.
So you stayed there for 2 years?
About 2 years, just shy of 2 years. So
okay.
It was like, yeah, not quite 2 years, but almost.
That's so cool to be in that environment.
From 16 to 18.
That's so cool. Yeah.
Yeah, and then through them, I got to meet like the primitive skill community. So there's Doug Myers, who's out there now. It's one of the leading experts in primitive technology, and he's like an uncle of mine. You know, super well.
Uh-huh.
Mainly the lineage is from Steve Watts. Steve Watts has passed on. He was the main guy at the archaeological studies at the Shield Museum of Natural History in Gastonia.
Whoa.
And he was the one that really got everyone going in the region there, holding workshops at the museum from like the 70s, 60s, 70s. And then.
So just to give people some kind of like a background of what primitive skills are, right? Like it's a very broad term, right?
Right. So it's pre-industrial revolution and a lot of it's pre-steel.
Okay.
So pre-metal, you know, before technology, before primitive peoples were using steel tools. Mm-hmm. So, and it's also like a lot of it's pre-agricultural too.
Okay.
You know, so it's
like arrowheads would be an example.
So yeah, it's basically living in complete union with the land and seeing and understanding that all the natural resources have applications. Mm-hmm. You know, like this plant is medicine. Mm-hmm. This plant is giving us fibers for us to make string from. This plant is a really good wood that makes really good coals for cooking. Mm-hmm. You know, this one, you know, the bark or the root bark off this plant can poison fish and make them float up, and we can collect them. You know,
so you learned all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
Wow.
So you learn that everything in the environment has a use, there's a reason that everything is existing. Mm-hmm. You know, everything is there for a reason.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. So what were some of the things that Hawkeye specialized in?
Hawkeye was the brain tanner. Hawkeye was the man when it came to like tanning deer hides and making leather, brain tanning.
Okay. And when you say brain tanning, so for people that don't know, you actually use, and you have your bag there, but
yeah,
we can show that. We can show that on the video.
So I've had this for 20 years. It's a leather brain tan bag.
Wow. That's really cool.
It's the only leather that you can breathe through. You can hold it to your mouth and breathe through it like fabric.
Really?
Yeah. All the other types of tan leather, you're not breathing through it. It's not breathable.
So can you do it with any type of animal?
Any animal.
And it's a technique of brain tanning that allows it to be breathable.
No. every animal has enough brains to tan its own hide, except for some people. It's an old brain tanner joke.
Right. That's cool. So there's a whole process to brain tanning.
Whole process.
Right? Like you gotta stretch the skin out, right?
Remove the flesh from the skin, and then you remove the hair. You can wet scrape it or dry scrape it. There's 2 different methods. And then what you end up with is a piece of rawhide, and it's just the skin element without flesh and without hair. And then you inside that skin, it is a matrix of millions and millions of fibers that are like kind of chaotically woven together. And in between all those fibers, there's a mucus. The mucus allows it to be lubricated and move when it's wet, when it's living and alive, or when it's wet. But when it dries out, that's what makes it stiff. That mucus makes it the rawhide.
Okay.
And it's also where they get hide glue from. If you Elmer's glue comes from the hides of animals.
Oh, I didn't know that.
And it's that mucus. They take the scrapings off the hides and they boil them and they collect the mucus off the top of the pot. And that's wood glue. That's Elmer's glue.
Oh, wow.
So what you need to do in the process of brain tanning is you're adding a lubricant into the fibers of the hide, and then you're keeping all those fibers moving so they're not staying connected, so they can't bind and set up on one another.
Okay.
And then so they're lubricated and you're moving them, and it's called breaking the hide and stretching it. As it dries after it's been lubricated with the oil from the brains, and then it dries soft, and it dries. And all those fibers they're not locked together. The mucus never had it. The mucus dried out without locking any of the fibers up. And then what we do is we string it up and we smoke it. We push smoke through it, and the creosote from the smoke coats all the fibers and keeps them from reactivating once it gets wet.
Oh, okay. So even if you got it wet, it wouldn't go back to being a rawhide.
After it's been smoked.
Right.
Good, yeah.
Oh,
it'll mess with it a little. It might get a little more stiff than it was originally, but it's not going to go back to being raw at all.
That's really interesting because I've had some sheepskins because in Kundalini Yoga we use sheepskins to sit on and to practice on. And I've washed them and then they've gotten stiffer. So that's what's happening.
I don't know the tan. More than likely they've been chrome tan, like a modern chemical tan.
Okay.
And I have never really experimented too much with modern tanning because I do primitive tanning, so I can't answer that.
Okay. So and then did he teach you how to hunt too?
So Hawkeye didn't like killing things.
Okay.
He was a bit of a.
But he liked to brain tan. That's really interesting.
Well, because he would get the hides from the. In North Carolina, you're not allowed to sell parts of wild animals. So, but they had processing plants people would hunt, and they would end up just throwing all the hides out.
Oh, okay.
So Hawkeye would go to the processing plant and just pick them all up for free.
Okay.
And then come back with garbage bags full of deer hides. We'd have what we call fleshing parties, where we were just like fleshing all these hides and stringing them up in the racks, and then getting another one and fleshing and stringing it up. And we'd go for the whole day.
Wow. That's really cool. And
he taught me how to hunt in a sense where we lived in this massive wildlife refuge.
Right.
And he took me in the woods and taught me how to walk, taught me how to move with the sounds of the nature. If the wind's not blowing, if there's not any background noise and you're walking on leaves, you're going to be the focal point of everything that has ears to hear.
Right.
But if you're smart about it and you walk when you know you have to walk on leaves or things that are going to make sound, you wait for a nice breeze to come through, and then you take a few steps.
Okay.
And then how you walk, and then paying attention to the wind, and really listening, and then understanding how to read the sign, the tracks, and the lay of the land, routes of least resistance. It definitely taught me all that stuff.
Wow.
Which really helped me later in the Army, because a lot of that stuff crossed over.
Right.
And would be applied in combat also.
Yeah. So did he teach you how to make a bow, I mean?
No, he wasn't big into that piece, but there were other friends in the community that taught me that. And
Oh, cool.
I probably made a dozen bows.
Yeah, I've seen some of them. They're really cool. So with the bows, was it after you lived with him for 2 years that you started hunting?
Oh yeah.
Okay.
It was after I had already joined the Army and I was stationed in Kansas.
Okay. Okay. And you were doing it mostly with just bow and arrow.
First deer that I shot with the bow I made.
Wow. That's so cool.
From the ground.
Wow.
I crawled up on it and set up in the grass and shot it.
Wow. And you and the hide and
I did all of it. Yeah.
Wow.
Yep.
And did you eat the meat?
Of course.
Yeah.
But anymore now, I have no desire to kill an animal.
Really?
Except to fish. I like to fish. And I'll go back to Hawaii and fish. And that's probably why I still eat fish, because I don't want to give up fishing.
I've seen you had this huge painting in your last apartment where it was like you took the giant marlin, right?
Yeah.
And you stamped it with the paint.
So in Hawaii, it's called gataku, and I might be pronouncing it wrong, but it's an art from Japan. It comes from Japan.
Yeah.
And they basically take a fish, and they take a fish and they wipe all the oil, they like dry it off and clean it off, and they take ink and they paint the fish in ink, and then take rice paper and press the paper onto the fish and make a print, like a stamping,
Yeah.
And then they peel the rice paper off, and it's a perfect stamp of the fish. And then when the ink dries, they take watercolors and they color in all the colors that you would see on the fish. Mm-hmm. And basically the ink shows all the different scales and all the different parts of the fin, all the different little contrasts of the actual fish. So it's almost like getting it mounted, because it's an exact stamp of it,
right?
But it's like flat, and you can put it on the wall.
It's so cool. It's huge. It's like three
panels.
Yeah, 3 panels that are like, I don't know. It's massive. It covers the whole wall.
Yeah, I caught that on a kayak.
Yeah, dude, that still blows my mind how you're able to pull those giant fish in from.
Well, nowadays kayak fishing is kind of mainstream, like popular, like everyone's doing it. But back in 2012, we were the pioneers a bit.
Oh, interesting. I didn't know that. That's really cool. Yeah. So what other skills, in terms of primitive skills, did you start to develop besides the brain tanning?
The flint knapping is a huge one that I took off on.
Which is like making arrowheads, right?
Yeah, it's flint knapping is a term for the lithic reduction of a stone material into a usable tool. Mm-hmm. And it's not carving, because you're not carving it down. It's a process of knocking controlled flakes off.
And it has to be a specific type of stone, right?
Right, high silica. Okay. High silica, very hard stone that will scratch glass usually.
Like obsidian,
flint, chalk, all those types of materials, rhyolites and things.
And some people even you do glass.
Glass and obsidian are pretty much the same. But yeah, you can take a panel of glass and nap it like it's a piece of obsidian.
That's so interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah. So you went and went into different challenges, right? Where people would.
No, not challenges. I mean, we'd go to nap. We go to
competitions.
Not really competitions. We'd come together and we'd all we'd call it a nap in. And people,
a nap in.
Yeah, people come together and they sit around and they all make arrowheads and knives and different things. And you got some guys that are really, really good, and guys that are learning. And it's just a community, where we just get together and break rocks.
Well, there was that one video I think I sent you of these guys napping a toilet.
So yeah, that was a competition. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So they're all friendly competitions.
Okay.
Yeah. We would do that at the Tennessee Classic, which is an ultra shoot I go to every year. They have the toilet bowl contest.
That's
so
funny.
Not actually using the toilet bowl, but mainly using the back, and it's porcelain and it flakes like flint, but it's also really coarse. It's very difficult to nap. Mm-hmm. So basically, bring the bowl into the middle of everyone, and we smash it with a rock, and everyone grabs a piece, and we start the time, and you got an hour to make something as nice as you can. and if you break it, you can grab another piece, but then you're behind, and then the judges not watching, they just see the finished points, and they have to they judge them off of like how clean is it, how symmetrical is it, how how much skill does the napper have to be able to do this or that, and then there's a winner chosen, and it's just a way to push guys to try to be better. Anytime there's competition, guys are motivated to, the egos are motivated to strive and to try to be the one that's recognized. And it's just a way to have fun and get better.
Yeah, for sure. So what I didn't realize until I met you is that there's all these different ways of making, like, all different kinds of styles, right? Like,
well, yeah,
of flint napping and making
because
arrowheads, right?
Those different styles are from the East Coast to the West Coast, and then globally too. It's not just something that was done in the Americas. I mean, those flint napping was done in Asia and Eurasia and Europe and Africa and Australia. I believe napping, like the lithic reduction of stone into usable tools, was done on every continent.
So,
and they're all a little different.
Okay, so are there a set amount that you studied or practiced with?
I mainly did this when I got stationed in Kentucky, in Tennessee. It was like right on the Kentucky border at Fort Campbell. There was a lot of lithic material around that region. There was a lot of flint, and there was a big culture of people finding artifacts in that area because there was so much material to have so many artifacts made, and there was a lot of nap-ins. So my big piece of my life when I was most into the flint napping was when I was stationed there for, I think, 2008 to 2010, or 2007 to 2008 to 2011. Yeah.
So you got really proficient at certain styles of the arrowheads?
Yeah, mainly Mississippian culture there, Yeah.
Okay. And do they have different names for different ones?
They all have different names.
Okay.
Yeah, but they're all modern names because we don't know what they were called 3,000 years ago.
Well, I just wanted to share a story. When I came to your apartment the first time, I looked at one of them and it was like pristine, and I said, "This one right here, it looks awesome." And you said, "It's the best one in the world." I'll never forget that. Remember that?
That might have been exaggerated, but I think that was the Cumberland that I had made. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And that one has like a flat, almost like a flat ridge.
That long flake that runs down the middle from the base to the tip. Mm-hmm. Yeah, it was a replica of a very famous point that was found.
Oh, okay. Yeah. And on that one, it was almost like a spearhead tip, right? Where they would attach, or was it also an arrowhead tip?
I believe so. Those would have, it's thought that those would have been mounted on a full shaft. So they would have been, a smaller stick would have been placed down those channels, and they would have been wrapped with sinew. Mm-hmm. And then that smaller stick would fit into the top of a bigger stick on a spear.
Oh.
But it could be taken off and used as a knife.
Okay.
And then placed into this channel on the spear and thrown like an atlatl.
Oh, wow.
Or used as like self-defense to fend off a saber-toothed tiger or whatever.
Right. Man, that's so interesting. Yeah. And then in that community, they do basket weaving. They do all of it. What are some of the other major primitive skills?
There's a little bit there's a similarities, but you have your survival skills.
Okay.
Primitive survival skills, and then you have your primitive living skills.
Right.
So primitive survival skills is like shelter building, getting clean water, procuring food to eat, and then your primitive living skills is going to be like how to make a basket, how to tan a hide, how to make some shoes, how to, make some bedding, how to get more comfortable in your primitive situation. Mm-hmm. Whereas primitive survival skills is like what it is. It's like the basics to survive. So first you have to do the primitive survival skills so that you can survive long enough to get comfortable in the primitive living skills.
Right. Okay. And you learned the whole gambit.
I mean, I have a bit. Yeah, I still have so much to continue to learn. You know, it's not something that you just learn and know. It's an ever evolving process and gaining the information. But for me, the beautiful thing about primitive living skills is it really connects us back to what it means to really be human. You know, it connects us back to the earth, back to the planet, back to the being in union with the planet. Because everything you're working with is living. You know, it all has an essence, it has a spirit. And it's a very beautiful way to reconnect to nature deeply,
right,
and intimately.
Yeah. Yeah, it's really amazing. And then there's events that happen around the country and around the world.
Yeah.
One of them being Rabbit Stick, right? We almost went this year.
Yeah, up in Idaho.
Yeah.
I think next year we'll go for sure.
Yeah, I want to go next year for sure. And in that and in an event like that, they have the whole
They have all that stuff. And I think it changes every year, but they have a lot of different skills you can choose from. Instructors from all over the place that come. One of my mentors, Doug Myers, will be there.
Oh, cool.
You know, he's there every year.
That's the one you said it's kind of like your uncle?
Yeah.
That's cool. That's cool. Well, man, this has been super fun. I had such an awesome time chatting with you, man. Thanks so much for coming on. I think we covered almost all the topics, but yeah, I think this is a good place to wrap it up. And you're always welcome back on the podcast, man. So thank you so much for sharing your beautiful journey and experiences. And until next time, brother.
Mahalo.
All right. Thank you.